All right. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so before I introduce myself, I'd like to calibrate a little bit who I'm talking to. So, yeah, who here uses preprocessors? Who here knows about them but would never use them? Okay, cool. What about constraint or logic programming? Little experience. Okay, some random ones. Who loves CoffeeScript? Who hates CoffeeScript? Okay, nice. And then, yeah, that's good enough. I think it's pretty solid. I figured it'd be good just to kind of show a quick demo, kind of talk about it, not explain it, and then we'll go through the history and lead up to that, just because my attention gets lost pretty easily too. So this is a very simple. This is a very simple layout, right? You got a panel, you got 4 buttons, an inner panel. Now, what's really interesting here, watch this. As I change the screen size, I'm going to describe something. So the panel is going to be some percentage width of the screen. But that blue button has a strong constraint to be in the middle of the panel. But a stronger constraint not to get too close to any of the buttons. Really straightforward here. Oh, look at this. There I am. All right. So, watch this. As I change, watch that button's going to get close to the other button and suddenly stops getting closer. So subtle, so simple. And at a certain point, boom, the constraints of the button actually dictate the width of the panel. Now what makes this crazy though, like super crazy, is the Chrome would actually work. Okay. So let's view page source. Now look at this. Can you see that? Let me move this over. The button, the panel, and the inner panel are all in the same level in the DOM tree. There is zero parent-child relationship in the DOM. Yet, if you look at it, it appears as if there is. That's what you call true source order independence. And that's a beautiful thing. So this is a little subtle thing. I'm going to show how this all happens. And yeah, we'll move to the other part now. Okay, so that's me pretty much everywhere. Twitter, Vimeo, Facebook, D4 Tocchini is my handle, GitHub. So if you have any questions or whatever. Yeah, so I'm the founder of a company called The Grid. You haven't seen us yet, and if you have, don't say anything. Yeah, we give you a little context about how I got here. About 24 hours ago, I was in Florence, and our it's small, but we're distributed. We have like 5 time zones on our team. Every couple months, we get together and hack in some crazy exotic location. Just plug in, no distractions. But right before I left Italy, we launched this site for grid style sheets, or GSS. And yeah, it was pretty cool. Word spread pretty fast. There was a epic discussion on Hacker News. It was on the front page for, longer than a day, which is cool. But yeah, it got pretty big. And then Simon over at O'Reilly, just talking with him, he thought it'd be cool to come do this. So this is totally like last minute. I left a day early from Florence. Yeah, so it's kind of exciting. Yeah, so quick though, who here's been to the GSS website? Okay, about half of you, that's good. One thing probably get clear, grid style sheets. It's called Grid because that's our company, The Grid. This is one of the platform tools we're giving away. Our consumer product's not out, but we're kind of pushing out these platform tools. We're also the guys behind NoFlow, and we had a great Kickstarter, one of the top 5 most funded software projects at the time on Kickstarter, which funded FlowHub. But that's another conversation. This is about GSS. So what is GSS? GSS reimagines CSS layout. It replaces the browser's layout engine with another one that harnesses the Cassawary constraint solver, right? And this is the same algorithm that Apple uses to compute native layout on all their devices. Okay, well, seriously, what is GSS though, right? If you search grid style sheets, all one word on Twitter, you'll see some cool stuff. I love these ones. What sorcery is this? I still don't get it. A lot of words. Not entirely sure what's going on, but I'm going to tweet it just in case it takes off. I like that. Here's some of my more favorite ones. I am become death. That was what Oppenheimer said when the first atomic bomb went off, right? And Alex Russell, good buddy, and who kind of helped get GSS up, right? This is amazing, right? So, is it like less or Sass or Stylus? Is it a preprocessor? No, not really. Kind of, but not really. We want to take CSS and just really bend it to our will. Add fundamental new features that are not possible when you just pre-process normal CSS. So to give you an example, this is what a preprocessor does, right? You take a flavored CSS, you compile it into normal CSS. Simple. What GSS is doing is a little crazier, right? You take flavored CSS, you compile it to JSON, you feed it to a layout engine that has a runtime connection to the DOM, and it's using this solver to compute all this crazy logic. And if web workers are available, it's doing on that so it doesn't block the main thread. So yeah, there's a lot more going on there. But, okay, cool, we can change it, but why would we change it, right? And specifically, like, GSS reimagines layout for CSS, right? Well, I think the big kind of red herring is like center alignment. Like okay. I'm going to show real quick a few of the many crazy techniques of centering something with normal CSS. I mean, before we get there though, wait, PowerPoint, right? You can center something in PowerPoint really easy. This should be a no-brainer on the web, the web as a platform, right? This is our life. So absolute centering, margin auto, you always cross your fingers, hope it works. And then what about vertically aligning? Maybe if there's a statically declared height, who knows? You get into these negative margin hacks. I'm sure you guys have all tried this when other things were working. But the problem with this stuff is like, you got to bake in the static width and height into the negative margin property, width plus padding divided by 2. So it's not fluid. It's not responsive. It sucks. There's a similar technique, negative translation. You could go table cell. That really sucks. Cause now you're adding additional markup for your layout, which is, always no good. Inline block, same thing. Flexbox. I mean, look at all the stuff we're going through. We're just trying to center something. Like, think about how crazy that is. I mean, it's like, layout on the web is arguably the most painful, time-consuming, outdated, piece of, just doing anything on it. It's ridiculous. And of course, there could be better things with topography, but there's something so fundamental about where it is, right, in the structure of a page. So, rare admission from the W3C from a working draft of a cool spec they're working on. Floats, don't cut it for application layout. They even say it. Bottom line. Imagine that. Center anything inside any other thing. One line. It doesn't matter where they are on the DOM tree. That's what GSS is pushing, and that's what it does. But that's just the beginning. So, yeah, this is Addy, he's the man. Center any element within any other one-liner. But there's a lot more stuff going on here. This whole constraint solving paradigm lays a foundation that gets crazy. What we're talking about here with the centering stuff is really relative positioning and sizing. This is a really simple example. It's on our site. It's like, okay, you look at these two outlines of devices, the iPhone and the iPad. How would you describe that layout? Well, they're horizontally. The centers are equal to each other, the horizontal centers, and the bottoms are equal to each other. I mean, you can see with GSS, the syntax is very close to your intention. It's not like float, blah, 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 display, all these words that you have to translate into your intention, or other way around, whatever. Very clear. So yeah, this made me, when I first saw this stuff, I was pretty pissed I couldn't have it. So that's part of the reason why we put so much time into this. But yeah, there's, this probably, the more you look into it, will make you angry, but there's a good reason why we don't have this. For a long time, there's, not countless, but a lot of blog posts of people saying, well, why don't we have this? Relative positioning and sizing would be so cool, right? And W3C, it's consistent. No. And we're like, why? Because cyclic dependencies. That's why we don't, how you have media queries, they can be responsive to the screen size. Why can't an element be responsive to its size? Cyclic dependencies, right? And it's actually a very, very difficult problem. Let me describe it real quick. So let's say you have 3 boxes. And you say box 1 width is equal to box 2's width, which is equal to box 3's width, which is equal to box 1's width. Now you have a circular loop, right? In the layout logic. And that's actually really hard to resolve, because even if you kind of purposely try not to have these circles, it happens. It happens. They naturally arise, and it's very hard to get rid of. So now we're going down the rabbit hole. I'm going to give a little bit of a background of where this stuff came from, and how Apple took it and really evolved it, and what we're doing with GSS. But let's go back to that crazy looking animal in that spacesuit. That's a cassowary bird. That's what the cassowary solver is named after. It's the world's most dangerous bird. Random. But this is the constraint solver that resolves cyclic dependencies in layout arithmetic. So in other words, it doesn't matter if there's a circle, it still gives you a value. It's actually really crazy. If you search this thing online, cassowary solver, cassowary constraint, there's some serious math going on in there. Lots of, matrix manipulation, and it's next level stuff. And that's really arguably why it hasn't been standardized, because it's not something you can easily describe in the spec. There's all this, Greg Badros, who's the author of the cassowary constraint solver as part of his PhD, he's actually been a really kind of instrumental, help with GSS. He's, recently became an investor in our company, The Grid. He just retired as, one of the top dudes at Facebook, VP of engineering and products. Now he's living the life, has beautiful babies and stuff. Anyway, so, this is a very kind of academic thing. And it's hard to use cassowary on its own. It needs a higher level kind of wrapping to make it useful, like a spacesuit, right? And so back in '99, he had a paper and a proposal for a thing called Constraint CSS, which, is one of the languages that GSS polyfills. It's pretty cool. Constraint CSS is just basically a way of kind of defining relative property constraints with strength and weight. So here's an example. The article, its font size is equal to box height divided by 2, strongly. So you see that exclamation strong? You can give strength, and there's built-in strengths. So strong, weak, medium, required. And all this stuff comes from constraint programming, which is a paradigm where you don't focus on how things happen, right? You focus on what you want to happen, the rules. I require this is less than equal than that. I want this to be like this. Well, I strongly want this. I weakly want this. And then you rely on some crazy math to do all the how, that you couldn't do naturally, right? Constraint programming is really cool, but it's guarded by a thicket of jargon that is deep. So yeah, venture carefully. Anyway, Alex Russell, he's been working on the kind of canonical JavaScript port of this that GSS uses. It's cassowary.js. It's on GitHub. I started working on contributing to it about a year and a half ago. And just working towards this goal of getting GSS out, really kind of having, rethinking CSS, and what he's done in there has been pretty awesome. But what's crazy about cassowary, right, it was released in 98 or so. And more than 10 years later, it was still just sitting in academia. It was not used, right? Probably because it's so freaking heady and all the math, it's hard to get there. And even though, Badros demonstrated responsive layouts that still to this day are not possible without JavaScript. That is it was in academia until Apple took it and Cocoa Auto Layout. So anyone familiar with that? Yeah. So what Apple did with OS X Lion is they completely redesigned the entire layout kind of architecture of their operating systems. It's an iOS now. and it uses Cassawary. And basically, that's what we did for the browser, right? But just with JavaScript, and hopefully it gets pushed native. But they did some interesting things, like with just property constraints, describing normal layouts, it's kind of verbose. So if you look at this, this is a description of 4 buttons horizontally aligned within a panel. That's kind of hard to see that, right? It's like the left plus 10 equals the right of that. It's not very nice. So they created this thing called Visual Format Language, or VFL. And this is another one of the languages that's polyfilled within GSS. So the idea is pretty straightforward. You see, horizontal, button 1, button 2, button 3, and that's actually that's the layout. So you can visually see the layout rather than trying to, figure out what's going on with the constraints. So what GSS really does is modernizes and kind of makes it more suitable for CSS. And so that example of the 4 buttons can actually be written in four ways. These are all examples where you horizontally align 4 buttons within a panel with a gap of 10. The first one, you see that property thing, gap? That's kind of like an implicit one for the dash. The little dash is a gap. You can be explicit on the second line and write the number there, right? Or you can even be even more implicit and just say get every button and put them inside panel horizontally with a gap of 10. But what's crazy with this, parent-child relationships do not matter. So you can say get all the buttons and put them inside this, put them inside that, and it'll look as if there's that parent-child relationship. So you have that true source order independence. And there's some crazy stuff I'll get to later with these kind of if-else blocks within CSS that kind of make it so you can do responsive insanity, because you don't have to touch the HTML and you can move everything around crazy. So yeah, we also modernized constraint CSS, so you can do nested rules. We added some special pseudo selectors, stuff like that. So let's go back to the Apple demo. Now you got a little experience with it. Let me refresh this real quick. So this is the actual GSS that produces this layout. And so I created a variable here called gap. Custom variables can be declared just bracket and brackets, and they just work. And one thing to keep in mind with constraints, other than with kind of normal programming, things are kind of global. So variables are available globally. So I say a gap of 18. I'm taking the panel. I'm saying its width is equal to the window width minus 480, but it has to be, is that less than equal to? Yeah, less than equal 720, blah, blah, blah. Center X of the panel is the window center X, right? So I can actually change this live. Center X of the panel is equal to window center X plus 200, right? And what you can actually do too, all this is doing is I just took the style sheet, the inline style sheet, and then display blocked and moved it in there. GSS uses mutation observers, so you can actually get into it's hard to see from here. You can go into the style sheet and just start hacking on it, and it'll update live. It's kind of cool. So let's just remove that. Yeah, straightforward. And so you see I'm saying horizontally, the inner panel is within the panel with a gap of that gap. Now, you see that dash and that vertical line? Do you see that? Yeah. The vertical line is the containment element that you defined in the in property. So that's the left vertical line there, where the cursor is the left side of the panel. Well, straightforward. So, blah, blah, blah. But let me show you where the button stuff is. So this is the layout of the buttons. B1, B2, B3, B4. It's that simple. And if I want to change the order, so we have remove right now there. Let's just put the share there. Oh, I think I put a constraint that was not solvable. So I should probably, it works. You could comment it out. It's just, I should probably make that editor a little bit smaller or a little bit smarter. But let's get back to some of the description here. Okay. Straightforward. I don't want to go too deep in that because that stuff's available online. But let me show you something about true source order independence. That it's so different than what we're used to. It's kind of crazy. So one of the earlier versions of GSS we used to build the FlowHub site, which is funded by Kickstarter. It's like a visual programming environment. You just kind of connect things with connecting blocks on a whiteboard kind of, and that's your software. So watch this. So you see this iPad, right? Okay, let's see if I can do this. So that's the iPad right there. I don't know if did you know you can drag things around? Isn't that cool? I didn't know that till like not too long ago. So I'm going to move it outside of that, parent-child thing, and I'm going to put it somewhere random. I don't know, right here, right, and at the root level. And let's get back here. It disappeared, but when I change the screen size, GSS will kick back in. It doesn't matter where it's at. Oh man. And that's really important to us for our company too, because we're doing a lot of crazy stuff with how do you automate a kind of a layout of a newsfeed. So this just allows you kind of scale your styles and keep HTML just the same and just crazy different, outputs with different CSS or GSS. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So if you use one of these properties on one of the elements, basically these get pushed into matrix 3D kind of transform, so things are hardware accelerated by default when that's available. Yeah, and the custom variables again, you can declare them just like that column size variable right there. I'm just using it. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that constraints are two-way. It's not like an assignment like a variable. When you say x equals y, x gets the value of y, right? But with this, that's why it's not equals. Equals. It's a little different. It's two-way. If column size changes, so does the other side. If one side changes, so does the other. So what CostWire is doing is trying to find the most optimal solution to the constraints that you added, right? So it's a different way of thinking. It takes a little practice, but yeah. And again, though, you might think that column size is only available within the scope of post, but no, everything's globally scoped. And you can actually add custom variables to instances of elements, which kind of gives you that scoping capability. So here what I'm saying is every post create the constraint variable column size. And I put that little $sign there just as so it doesn't look like a native property. You could do that, but just be careful, right? It's kind of just a good practice. And so basically every post every element is going to have a constraint that the column size is going to be 3 times its own line height. Right? Straightforward. Yeah, and then we added a few special pseudo selectors. There's actually more coming, but yeah, Window's really powerful. Parent, and then this. When you see the colon, that's this. So you can see here it says box. Every element with the class box, its width is its parent's width, and its line height is equal to its own width divided by 12. Straightforward. Yeah, and things get a little crazy because you can use that this within VFL statements, and it gets just kind of super crazy looking. Yeah, and okay, one thing that's pretty cool, and it was actually not easy to do, was how do you respect text flow? So let me show you an example. I'll just show you on the GSS website, I guess. So everything on this site is kind of laid out through constraints with GSS, and it's kind of responsive to, you see here, if I change the screen size, and it animated there too, because, magic. But you'll notice that, so you see how that title, relative positioning and sizing, it goes from like 2 lines to 1 line, but that's like respected within the constraints. That was freaking hard, man. So the way you do that is with intrinsic height or intrinsic width. So what I'm saying here is every paragraph, its height is equal to its own intrinsic height. We have to do this because think of GSS as another world. It only knows what you let it know, right? And so if you want its actual like text height, you have to say measure it. And that's a way of kind of doing that. So one thing that's a gotcha whenever you start, you're gonna be like, oh, I see these cool little examples like with VFL, and you do it and it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because you have not given it enough information. So whenever there's a problem, just give it more constraints. You know, intrinsic width, intrinsic height. Give it a width, a height, or give it a size and a position, or it'll be too ambiguous and it won't know. That's the first gotcha that everyone goes through. I even have it all the time. It's annoying. But once this stuff's baked in, it'll be a little easier if it ever gets baked into the browser. But it doesn't matter. That works. One thing to keep in mind is that when you do an intrinsic property, it reads it from the DOM, right? There's a whole kind of deferred layout cycle going on here. So there is an impact. Don't say like everything's intrinsic height or height is equal to into, you know, whatever, because it is a little expensive. If you can, you know, bake in a normal height and width and not worry about intrinsic height, that's cool, but that's just not realistic, right? So VFL connections. A button plus, you know, next to a text field with a gap of 8. Here's two ways of doing it with VFL. One with a, you know, explicit gap, another one with a, you know, property. Now what's cool though is you see the last line there, that's the equivalent CSS. So what's really interesting about VFL is that every VFL statement is just compiled into CSS, which is then compiled into the kind of instructions. So it's a very strong layout kind of stack or language stack. So everything at VFL goes into CSS. And that's all I do. I wrote a compiler that just takes VFL and generates CSS, right? And there's actually another layout language that we're going to be releasing, I'll talk about later, that just compiles into VFL. So it's just think about easier ways of writing the lowest level. So if you know the lowest level, you know the higher levels, right? There's a thing called cushions that we added. This wasn't in Apple's original spec, but think it's a little tilde, might be hard to see, but the tilde basically says, don't equal them, use an inequality. So that's the equivalent down there. I'm saying vertical, the box 1 is on top of box 2, but no, it just can't be closer than that. Not that it's connected, it just can't be closer. So you saw that in the demo with the blue button. I used cushions to say that button can't be too close to these other buttons. And yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. Yes, oh, that title's wrong. It's actually containment. I already explained this, but you can see that purple box has a gap of 50 pixels within the container, and you just use those kind of vertical lines. What are those things called? I don't know. Pipes? Yeah, whatever they are, yeah. Okay, chain height, or chains. This is really powerful. But it's also can get a little confusing. So here I'm saying there's two buttons or whatever. They're horizontally flush with each other and so their height and their width are the same, but their width are equal to 250. Right? So it allows you to kind of chain things, and you can actually use chains outside of VFL. There's more stuff on this site, on the site, and the site's like literally like it's pretty new, so a lot more stuff's coming out. But you can do some crazy stuff. This is a more advanced example. You see it says chain center X. So the center X of every element and every item in that layout is equal to the panel center X with a required constraint. So you can get all crazy with this. There's actually more stuff too I won't show, but same thing with this other one, width. That chain statement looks weird. But if you look on the bottom, so think of that right there as the connection between those two widths. So really what it allows you to say is, you know, their widths have to be greater than equal to that in a chain. And there's certain use cases, like I use this in more, I don't know, it's crazy. It goes pretty deep. I'm not going to show all the layout stuff, but there's some. Now, if-else directives. These are a replacement for the hacky media queries. I don't like media queries. So here's an example. The equivalent if-else with the same thing as a media query. Because if you think about it, with media queries, that's all you're saying, right? If the window's width or the screen's width is less than 960. So we just made it a little bit more just like that. But then instead of just targeting screen, you can target anything. any property, any element. So you can see here, now we have element level responsiveness. So if the panel's width is greater than this, if the panel's width less than this, you set up different rules. And you can get really crazy with this. You can imagine like you have a cool kind of newspaper layout and you have an article, right? And you say, okay, if the article is put in a size that's really small, make it like a link, right? But if it's really, wide, put the image on the side. If it's really tall, put the image right here. And you can describe all this very visually with VFL, and the HTML never changes. So you can move this article around in different sizes and it'll know what to do. So there's a lot of, it takes practice, right? There's no silver bullet. The big one, like I said, is ambiguity. Add more constraints. You need to tell it what its width and height are, and it's X and Y. So that's one thing to keep in mind always. And another thing it's hard to think about, our constraints are two-way, right? That's a different way of thinking. It's powerful, but with a lot of power comes responsibility, right? So one thing with this is, you saw the strengths where you can do strong, weak, medium, require. What I usually do is I'll create variables up top of my style sheet, and I'll require them all to, it's just like this variable is equal to, column size equal to 32. Then I'll say require, because that column size is actually going to be used in other constraints where it could be changed by the other side of the constraint. So if you require a variable to equal that number, then that's more like a normal assignment. So, but there's different techniques you can use with this stuff. So just to keep that in mind. We get asked a lot about the current kind of browser kind of support and what our roadmap is. Right now it works in IE 11. It will work in IE 10 probably in a couple of weeks. I don't like that. I don't even like thinking about that. It works in all modern browsers other than that. But a bigger thing that's really going to be awesome is precompilation. So like a preprocessor, you can precompile stuff and send the browser the JSON, but we need this runtime access to the DOM, right? What is the screen size? The screen size is going to dictate different constraints and different values. So one thing we're working on is for static sites generated from Jekyll, is actually to simulate every screen size in Node and then produce a map of CSS variables, so you don't even need the runtime. What this means is it'll work on any browser, and it'll work arguably faster than native if it was implemented natively, because there would be no query resolution. We break everything down to kind of static IDs and stuff. So this is going to be crazy. This is what GSS was not built as some kind of library theoretical cool thing. It was built for our company, for our product that we have to use. This is mission critical for us. So yeah, we're in the same boat you are, and it has to work on crappy IE. So this will come. Visual grid language. This is another the next big thing coming. Basically, who here knows of the grid layout module or grid template layout module, W3C specs? Well, they're flawed in some serious ways. And one way to look at it is just the kind of API surface area explosion, right? They have all these different words like justify as a vertical or a horizontal alignment. I don't know. And then you have they use a lot of words, right? So what VGL does is it uses the primitives established in VFL, and it basically goes to feature parity with grid template layout and grid layout modules. So, and what that will do is it'll give us a full stack. You have CCSS for property constraints, just relative anything. You have VFL for one-dimensional alignment. And you have VGL for kind of abstract two-dimensional grid-based design. And then what's cool is every level of the stack, they all compile down into the same thing, CCSS. It's pretty crazy though, with VGL, when you write one simple statement, it'll be up soon, how much CCSS is produced. I mean, you're talking dozens and dozens of lines of CCSS. So it's just going to be making this stuff easier to use. And one thing to keep in mind too is we're right now we're kind of really aggressively expanding our core language features. So like this VGL thing, we're going to add a lot more pseudo selectors, stuff like that. But then once we're kind of like satisfied with the breadth of what we have, we'll start to go back and do things like units and values. Because right now you saw it's just numbers. We just haven't got to the, M's and, even like there's some cool other, layout units that we're thinking about, like grid modules and stuff. But yeah, so we'll get around to that. That'll come. But right now, like it defaults to pixels unless it knows, like if you use z index, you can constrain z index. No, it won't use pixels, stuff like that. But that will be coming. And you can. There's my email, my handle. If you have any questions, whatever. I think. Yeah. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what's it doing when it gets to the browser? Is everything just positioned absolutely?
Yeah, everything. So position absolute, and it kind of normalizes everything to a kind of a global world transformation space, and it uses the matrix 3D.
So it takes into account like offset params?
Yeah.
Okay. And then imagine you have a floated image, like traditionally CSS floated image. And then there's a large paragraph that follows it. So you would end up with text flowing beneath the image.
Yeah.
After the image.
Yeah.
And now I want to use GSS to set that image to be 50% of the width of the container, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you manage the text flow?
Yeah. So right now, to use text flow, you have to use the browser's text stuff. But to kind of, you could feed into it intrinsic width, intrinsic sizes. But I know that right now though, cause actually was just in hacking on this in Italy, and there is some bugs with that. Just cause right now, think of GSS more like a whole nother world, and where it comes back into contact with normal CSS's world, is kind of annoying. But yeah, we need to do that too. I know. So.
Is there a full-on equivalent? Like if I didn't use any standard CSS?
Yeah, so, no, yeah, with floats, no, you still need to, you have to do some weird intrinsic stuff there. But there is some other stuff like, we're looking into some other things, like kind of how to solve that. But yeah, definitely.
Just a quick follow-on, like regions and exclusions, which is, controversial somewhat.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, are you thinking about doing that in a different way?
Yeah, so that's the other thing too, because the stuff that...
Because that his use case could actually be solved by region.
Exactly, that's the thing that we've been actually talking about. I think regions is awesome. And if you read like the reason why some of the CSS people don't like it is because it requires non-semantic markup, right? For kind of the flow zones. Who here knows CSS regions? It should be in the browser. It's killer. Google just removed it from theirs. Hopefully they'll add it back. They've suggested they might. Anyway, yeah. So with what we're showing here, and with the VGL where there's like abstract layout elements that aren't like kind of like you can constrain to but aren't in the DOM, that would be the solution to all the problems with CSS regions. But yeah, all the stuff like the float stuff is going to be a little bit longer. One thing that we are working on though, I forgot up on the roadmap, is a redo of the floats but without text reflow. So more like masonry. So you can say float up, left, down, right. And then that way you can constrain still naturally all the elements in that floated layout. That's pretty wicked. One thing I do though to get around the issue you brought up is think of like if you have a lot of text, it gets really annoying to do all this intrinsic measuring. So just put all your normal text in like a container and then just constrain that around. That makes it a little bit easier. So you kind of have to use normal CSS when that happens. Yeah, our hope is that we're kind of just going to show them. Talking, I don't think really helps. But our main concern is battle, because we've been working on this for a couple years actually, and just, show it that it works and then let that happen naturally. I don't want to get involved in like a heady abstract conversation because it's, don't have time for that. Yeah. Debug. Yeah. So right now, the best way to do it is to kind of, kind of add constraints and remove them and see which one breaks. If you use a lot of required, so required is one of the strengths that you can use, or require, either one works. But the problem with that is you can easily get in a situation where things aren't solvable, and I'm like, eh. So it's kind of annoying. One thing that we should probably add would be like a kind of iterative add, solve, so it'll tell you where it breaks. But right now you just kind of just remove a chunk, see if it breaks. That's it. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, and there's if you search grid style sheets on Twitter and stuff, a lot of conversation happening. There's some people have been busting out some demos. This one dude from France put some out. It was pretty good. So yeah, and then right now the site's real sparse, but there's gonna be tutorials and all that stuff coming soon. So yeah, it's GSS.